Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Chantel and today I am going to be doing a standalone book review of King Sorrow by Joe Hill. I want to preface this by saying that the first part of this review or discussion, whatever, is going to be non-spoilery. And then later on, I am going to discuss a few things that may be considered spoilers for the book, particularly the later half of the book. So I will say when I'm about to go into more spoilery territory, but the first part of this video will be spoiler free. So if you haven't read the book and you're like interested in hearing what I thought about it, without spoilers, then you can certainly watch the first part of this video without any problems. So, that having been said, I want to get into some of my thoughts about this book. First of all, the general premise of this book is that 6 friends in college decide to help out one of their number who has gotten into trouble with a local drug dealer by summoning a dragon from the long dark, as you do when you're in college, right? That seems like a pretty normal college thing to do. And so they do. And this dragon, King Sorrow, takes care of the problem for them by killing the drug dealer, right? Essentially. But what they consider to be a one-time thing, King Sorrow has determined is going to be a lifelong deal that they have entered into, whereby every year they must choose another sacrifice for King Sorrow, or one of their number will be killed instead. So they find themselves in this sort of moral conundrum that they have to deal with year in and year out. And the book follows this group of friends over the course of about 30 years, basically until the present day. It starts in 1989, and it goes basically until the present day. And we follow them and sort of how they deal with the moral conundrum that they find themselves in, how they try to live their lives either because of or in spite of their own sense of guilt or moral culpability in the, in the killings that King Sorrow does, that they choose for him. And so it's a very interesting sort of long-term look at this group of friends and the relationship dynamics between them and these very thorny sort of moral and ethical quandaries that they're in. So yeah, it's a very long book, but for me it went very, very quickly. It's over, I read it in ebook form on my Kindle, and it's almost 900 pages in ebook form, but it went very quickly for me. Parts of it read like a thriller, like a very fast-paced thriller, where you're just like you're just pulled along with the momentum of the story and the desire to find out what happens next. That, I think, combined with the fact that most of the chapters are actually quite short, means that it just moves very, very quickly, especially considering how long it is. So I did give this book 5 stars. I really, really liked it a lot. I think one of the things that I liked the most about it was the character dynamics and the ways in which our main characters all sort of interacted with each other, and the ways in which their relationships developed over time became really the core of the book, the heart of the book, and I was really, really fascinated by that the entire way through the book, and I never lost interest in how those relationships were playing out among this group of 6 friends. And that, I think, really forms the core of what makes this book so compelling to me, because it's so character-driven. I think the other thing that made it so compelling to me was just the ideas that it tackles, I think the combination of the historical setting, the actual time period that is being covered, which is a very specific and real time period in American history that these people are living through as adults, plus the fantastical element of the dragon, makes it really compelling and allows Joe Hill to make some pretty explicit connections between trauma and violence, terrorism, genocide, and our own moral culpability in atrocities committed around the world in the name of the United States, in the name of vague concepts like patriotism, democracy, the war on terror, and things like that. Plus, domestic issues or more domestic issues such as the rise of extreme right-wing violent rhetoric and other things like that. I think Joe Hill does a really good job of tying all of those things together using the metaphor of the dragon, so to speak, without releasing anyone from culpability in those events. It's very clear in the course of the book that King Sorrow may be the one doing the violence and killing people, but the people who are directing him are just as culpable, right? The people who have brought him into the world in order to do violence are just as culpable as the dragon itself, right? So I think a lot of fantasy books tend to, at least inadvertently, if not intentionally, kind of release humans from culpability in violence when they say, oh, well, it was magic or it was dragons. It wasn't the people that did it. It was the magic. It was the dragons, right? But this book really sincerely and effectively makes the case that it doesn't really matter what weapon is being used to commit these horrific atrocities. It's still the fault of the person wielding the weapon, ultimately, right? There's still a level of responsibility that is on the shoulders of the person who orders the drone strike or orders the bombing, who orders the incineration of the school filled with children, or the prison complex that may or may not have guilty people or innocent people in it. Ultimately, the responsibility rests with not just whoever actually physically does the killing, but whoever orders it in the first place and whoever decides that it is a price that they're willing to pay for whatever, for, again, democracy or peace in our time or whatever justification you use for it. Whoever is ordering these atrocities is ultimately culpable in them, as culpable as whoever is actually committing the crimes themselves. So I thought that was a really interesting angle to take, and I thought that, again, going into it, I wasn't entirely sure why it was set, in the time period that it's set in, because, theoretically, Joe Hill could have, set this novel in any time period that he wanted to, in any place, in any time, any context that he wanted to. And so I really enjoyed that as it got further and further into the book. It became clearer and clearer to me exactly why it was set in the time period that it was set in, and against the backdrop of the real historical events that were happening in the 90s and the aughts and the 2010s, you know, that, like, there's a reason for it. And as we can see the characters develop as well, we can see how they are also enfolded into the context and the time period in which they are experiencing this, right? So, you know, for instance, one of our main characters eventually becomes like a right-wing conspiracy theorist podcaster on the lines of like a Rush Limbaugh, right? One of them actually does that. And that's like her reaction to not just the King Sorrow thing, but also some stuff that happened in her past when she was a kid that she is never fully able to process, right? And that's a really interesting through line, I think, for me, and it makes for a really fascinating character study. And Joe Hill does a good job of never really, like, demeaning any of these characters, right? It would be really easy to make that right-wing conspiracy theorist podcaster character into a kind of caricature, into a kind of one-dimensional person who is really easy to hate. But he avoids all of that, right? He makes us sit with all of the complexities that make these people who they are, and explaining why they do the things that they do, which I think is always more interesting and more intellectually honest, I think, than trying to just sort of make someone into a one-dimensional caricature. So yeah, I really liked it. I thought the writing was really excellent. It's very readable, it's very smart, it's very nuanced. King Sorrow himself is a potent presence in the book. Though he has relatively little actual page time, when he shows up, it's always very memorable. And yeah, I had a good time with it, and I thought, you know, it ended in a way that felt very fitting for what the book is trying to say. And now I am going to move a little bit into some spoiler territory, or what I think people might consider to be spoiler territory. So I don't want to, if you're here and you don't want to know some things that happen in the later part of this book, I recommend pausing now and going and reading the book, because it's actually a very good book, and I think you should probably read it. It's definitely worth your time. But from here on out, I am going to be talking about some things that happen with some of these characters in the later part of the book that might be considered spoilers. So spoiler warning, blanket spoiler warning for the rest of this discussion video. Okay, so that having been out of the way, I do think it's interesting that some of the complaints, I suppose, or criticisms that I've seen of this book is that King Sorrow himself is sort of underutilized as a villain, but I think on balance, my understanding is that King Sorrow isn't really the villain of the book, per se, right? It's Colin, right? Colin is the villain of this book in a very literal sense. He's the one who is directing and controlling most of what's going on here for his own ends and his own purposes, as much as it is possible to direct and control a force like King Sorrow, right? Which I don't know that any one person could really direct and control, but again, that becomes a metaphor in and of itself, I believe, right? And Colin, as the villain of this book, also represents sort of the villains of real life, right? Like, he is quite literally a representative of the billionaire ruling class who, you know, they have all of this information, they collect all of this data on us, and they are the ones who are directing, you know, they're directing international policy, right? They're directing they are the ones that are allowing countries like the United States to go abroad and commit these atrocities and to maintain such a strict class division at home domestically, and to make sure that us, poor peons are all culpable in the things that our government does, in the atrocities that are committed by our leaders, both at home and abroad. I think there's a really telling moment in the book, maybe in the middle-ish of the book, when they're basically like Blackwater guys, they're like government military contractor guys. They're trying to get King Sorrow to work for them, to ally with them, and King Sorrow says very explicitly, I'm already your ally, right? I've been doing stuff like this for you and people like you all over the world for all of history. And so, like, you don't need to do anything to get me on your side because I already am on your side, right? I was there in Vietnam when atrocities were committed. I was there in Korea when atrocities were being committed. I was there in Afghanistan and Kuwait and Iraq when atrocities were being committed. In the Philippines, I was there, right? So, like, it's not subtle. It's not really even subtext. It's just text, right? That there's an explicit and direct connection between King Sorrow and the military-industrial complex, right? Like, King Sorrow is, in some sense, a metaphor for the military-industrial complex. And Colin Wren is the human face of that, right? He's, again, he's like a billionaire technocrat who has all of these gadgets, and he owns this, shady software company called Dragonware. It might as well be called Palantir, right? Which of course is a real thing, a real company that really exists and really has all of our data. And he uses it to further his own power and his own ends. And he uses King Sorrow in the same way. And that is what the billionaire technocrats really do, right? That's actually what they do. It's, again, I don't think it's subtle, but I'm not sure we need subtlety right now in our current political climate. I feel like subtlety sometimes is a little bit of a stumbling block, I think, for some people, but I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and the fact that Colin is such a sociopath, I think is also really like true. A lot of studies have shown that the really, really super rich people in the world have very little, if any, empathy, because when you live in a bubble surrounded entirely by yes men and you don't have to interact with the world in the same way that normal people do, you lose all your empathy, right? You just don't have any empathy anymore. That's been proven over and over again. And Colin Wren is like this really condensed amalgamation of all of that. And I think it's really fascinating, and the character studies in this book, I think, are just really, really good. I do think it's telling, of course, that Gwen is the most underprivileged member of this group of 6, right? She's by far the most underprivileged in that she comes from the working class, the servant class, right? Her family has literally been the servants of Colin Wren's family for generations. And she is the one who also has the most compassion and the most understanding. And she is the one who also feels it the most, right? She feels the weight of King Sorrow the most, such that King Sorrow really, really wants to kill her because, of course, King Sorrow feeds primarily off of sorrow and off of pain and off of guilt and all of these negative emotions, and Gwen is the one who feels these the most, and thus King Sorrow is the most, you know, motivated to come for her in the end, right? And I think that's obviously, you know, again, like, that maps so readily onto my own experience of the world that it just works for me very well. So yeah, that is my review, discussion, analysis of King Sorrow by Joe Hill. I thought it was very good. I'm very glad my best friend recommended me to read it, and I'm very glad that I did read it. It was a very fun time. It was very well written, and I enjoyed it a lot. I think it's definitely going to be one of my favorite reads of the year. So yeah, that's what I have today for you. If you want to talk about King Sorrow a little more in the comments, please feel free to. Like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see some more from me, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!